Previously, I recorded a macro using the command on the View tab. This time I'm going to use the Developer tab to record the macro. And so I'm just going to click on Developer. And here's the Record Macro command. For this particular macro, I want to be sure to use absolute references, so I need to make sure that Use Relative References is not highlighted before I start. I'm going to click on Record Macro, and the typical Record Macro dialog box opens up. I'm going to type in a macro name and a keyboard shortcut. I'm going to make sure that it's storing the macro in this workbook, and the particular workbook that I'm working on would be my macro workbook, where I keep all of the macros that I use frequently. So in the description, I'm just going to type a brief description so anyone else who uses this would know what it's for. And it's always a good idea to do things like this in case you're ill and someone else steps into your job, or you decide to accept another position. So my macro is now recording. I'm going to go ahead and start out by selecting cells A1 and A2 and changing the font to Cambria and the font size to 16. Then in cell A1, I'm going to key the company name, All Around Vision Care. And in cell A2, I'm going to insert the current date. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the format of that date by right-clicking and choosing Format Cells. I'm going to apply a custom format that just displays the month spelled out and the year. So I'm going to type in the code for that, MM, 4 M's and 3 Y's. And I will click OK. And I am done recording the macro. So to test the macro, let's go back to the Developer tab first of all and click the Macros button, and there is my macro name. If I click Edit, you'll see the steps that I took to create the macro. So I'm going to go ahead and test it. So I'm going to delete or clear the information in A1 and A2, clear all because I want to clear the formats as well. I'm then going to click in C2 before I run my macro. I'll go to Developer, I will click Macros and click Run, or I could have used Control-Shift-A. The reason why I clicked in cell C2, I wanted to demonstrate that even though I was clicked in a different cell in the worksheet, because I used absolute references, that label that I created with the macro is always going to be placed in A1 and A2. Now, since this is a macro workbook, and because other people may use this at some point, you should document the macros. So in D1, for example, you could type a description of this particular macro. and then also include the keyboard shortcut for the macro, so that anyone else using this workbook knows what's contained in the workbook and how to use it. It's always a good idea to include documentation with your workbook to explain things like range names, macros, what the workbook is used for, etc., in case you, the originator of the workbook, are not using it, but someone else who may not know all about this process is using it. Okay, so that's it for the macros.